with Sarah McDugal. I am so looking forward to this interview today. She's one of my favorite people to interview and talk to, and I'm looking forward to learning from her today. So, as everybody's joining, if you don't mind dropping in the comments where you're watching from, feel free to share this. It's going to be really good information. So, Sarah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Lauren. It's been a while. I mean, I know we did several things together last year, and then COVID and everything was crazy. So at least my life was.
Yes.
So
Oh, my life was yes.
yeah, I'm glad to be back with you guys. So my name is Sarah McDugal, and I'm the co-founder of Wilderness to Wild and the Trauma Mamas mobile app. And I'm also a survivor. I'm the mama of two autistic children who are very wildly neurodivergent and completely fun and a complete handful, and I love them dearly. And I'm also a survivor of a child sexual abuse and of domestic violence. So we're here to talk to mamas today, right? We're here to
Yes.
talk to other mamas.
Yes, and just encourage them along their journey, especially if you have trauma in your background, which if you've been through domestic abuse, you do.
Yes.
And your parents are very talented. And so we hope today provides just some resources and thoughts as well that you take with you and incorporate into your parenting. So I have a couple questions for you.
Absolutely.
Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Go.
So what are the most common challenges that survivors of domestic abuse face when parenting their traumatized children?
So I know I love that you like to start with the loaded questions. There are
Oh,
no short answers. There are no quick answers to questions like this. But that's why we're here to just chat through it, right? So first of all, there are a couple of different scenarios. I'm sure there's more than two, but there's a couple of main different scenarios where mamas are parenting their children after domestic violence. And one of those scenarios is where I'm thinking of a third one. So one of the scenarios is where mama escapes and gets out. The children are scared of their family's abuser. They are hesitant. They are highly traumatized. They are aware of the fact that dad has traumatized them. In other words, they're not burying the fact that dad is the source of trauma and blaming mom. They are recognizing that the trauma came from dad. They're scared of dad. They probably love dad. They are attached to dad. Oftentimes they were sheltered from the worst of it, but they still picked up on the tension and the fear. And in some of these situations, dad has turned anger or aggression or assault or even sexual abuse onto the children. And so when they get out, mamas are parenting these they're traumatized children, and the children do not want to go on time with dad because they are scared of what can happen because they have personally experienced dad's bad side. So that's one scenario. And that presents a certain set of parenting challenges. Another scenario is where mom protected the children so very well by never letting on what was going on, where more of the abuse was covert, behind the scenes, directed and aimed more directly at mom. And whenever things started to get rough, dad turned into the entertainer. And so he became Disney dad. He plied the children or continues to ply the children with gifts. And here the children are torn between mom being different, scared, traumatized, trying to get safe, and their own lived experience which is that dad is freaking awesome. Dad
Yeah.
lets them get away with everything. Dad makes everything mom's fault. Dad is fun. Dad takes them out to dinner at restaurants. Dad buys the big toys. Dad doesn't have screen time rules. Dad is the play parent. And so when dad is planting these seeds about how, well, your mom broke up our family, mom did this, mom did that, quite often that follows in this particular scenario where mom has sheltered the children from the abuse so well that their experience with dad does not make them scared of him. And now she is parenting, yes, traumatized children, but traumatized children who view her as the main problem for the shift in the family's dynamics.
Yes.
So these are two very different scenario profiles. And
Mm-hmm.
we have mamas who are trying their hardest to parent through both of these. And the advice has to be very different for these two because there is not a one size fits all set of advice for both of these types of scenarios. Another scenario could be where the children experienced the trauma from dad and they have experienced mom being very, very checked out and not able to parent because of her own trauma or perhaps medical problems or other
Mm-hmm.
circumstances. And then
Yeah.
they feel abandoned by both parents. That's
Mm-hmm.
another potential scenario. Um, Another scenario is if dad took the kids and was abusing mom and now mom is without the children. That's another scenario. Um, so there's a lot of kind of different profiles or different baskets when we're talking about survivors of domestic abuse parenting their traumatized children. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important to outline those first. There are probably other scenarios, profiles that I haven't mentioned. And if you're watching this and you fall into a different one, yours is equally valid as the ones that I mentioned. There's no way for me to mention all of them. Um, but these are some of the main ones that we see and work with. And then there are variations inside each of these kind of categorical baskets. Um, that being said, I think it's very, very important to make it clear that if you are dealing with a child who is being used as a weapon to punish you by your family's abusive parent, your pain is different. It looks different than the mom who's handing her children over to dad and they're kicking and screaming and clinging to mom every week.
Mm-hmm.
But both types of pain are very vivid and very
Yeah.
real and very heartbreaking. So if your ex is turning your children against you,
Mm-hmm.
it's excruciating, especially when you've done everything you can to try to get safe. And then this is what you get slapped back with, and your kids don't understand. If that's your situation, it's important to remember that a piece of the puzzle is very likely because you did such a good job of protecting them from knowing how bad he treated you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if there's any comfort in that, to cling to that, knowing that they don't understand how bad he is or how mean and cruel or scary he could be in private because you sacrificed yourself on the altar of protecting them from knowing that.
Wow. Yes, and that's hard. And I
It's
love what you said about both of those pains being equally valid too, because I feel like trauma mamas trying to like compare themselves to other trauma mamas, and they're just like, "Well, I wish I had your situation," or you know what I mean? And it's very invalidating, and it very much hurts, when
yeah,
your situation looks different, but they are not, so it's just understanding each of us bear our own cross in that. And I
Yes.
don't know if you really call it cross, or I guess it would be cross, our own suffering. Um,
Yeah, we each experience our own deeply painful suffering, and for different situations it looks different. There are
mhm.
different there are different sources of the spikes that stab us. Now, another situation is the mom who knows her children are being harmed physically, sexually, psychologically, where her
Yeah.
children are profoundly terrified of their dad. And she is forced, in order to not go to jail, she's forced to hand over the children for parenting time on some regular basis. And she may be having to pull her children screaming and crying and peel them off of her, pull them out of the car and buckle them into dad's car. And then she sits there shaking and crying, not knowing what will happen to them until dad brings them back, or if dad will bring them back. And
Mhm.
that is a completely different scenario and also profoundly painful.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, we know mothers like that, and
We know
just
mothers like that.
yeah.
It's and then another scenario is the moms who you have experienced profound harm from your children's dad, and maybe he never overtly harmed the children. Now we
Mhm.
know that if you are abusing your children's mom, you can't be a great safe dad. But there truly are dads who the moms don't feel like their children are in danger on dad's
Yeah.
time. He may
Right.
be
Yeah.
he may be flaky, he may be kind of neglectful, but he's not raping them or beating them or really messing with their heads. Like, it's far from ideal. But then those moms may have children who really long for a connection with dad, and
Mhm.
dad just never bothers.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't feel unsafe to let the kids go with dad for dinner or let the kids spend a weekend at dad's house. Um, and their heart is broken because their kids would like to have that connection, and dad's a total flake. And he just
Mhm.
doesn't prioritize his kids at all. And then you're left parenting children who are traumatized by that abandonment and rejection, and they can't figure out what's wrong with them or why, and you're
Mhm.
trying to fill those shoes. So there's so many ways. And I guess I'm starting off listing these because I want to make sure that if you're a trauma mama and you're listening, that if your story doesn't match the other people you know or everyone else in your support group, it's okay. It's okay to have your own unique story. So and these different profiles are some of those common challenges. So the mom who has children, let's look at the actual challenges now that I've listed out those different options. um,
Mhm.
One of the big challenges, if your children know they are unsafe, is helping your children reintegrate to feel safe when they come home, and
Mm.
helping your children have age appropriate tools to make safe decisions to the best of their ability for their age when they are away from you, to know what to do in case of emergency, to know what is allowed and what is not allowed if they are harmed, to know what is harm. So
Mhm.
that's a big challenge. How do you reintegrate them after shared parenting time, and how do you prep them to help make themselves as safe as possible when they are out of your care? Um, Another common challenge is, how do I counteract active poison being dripped into my children against me
Mhm.
by the other parent? And
Yes.
in this one, I want to point out that I do not use the term parental alienation. Uh,
Yes, we don't either.
I know you guys don't, but maybe just a quick reason
Mhm.
why, for those who may not know why, the term
Yes.
parental alienation was invented by a kind of debunked psychologist, counselor, therapist named Richard Gardner. And his entire goal was to make it easier for sex offenders and pedophiles who got out of prison to be reunited with their minor children over the protests of their protective mothers. So he went on the record in his writings as saying that children can and should be able and encouraged to enjoy sexual encounters with adults, and that any child who rejects a father, primarily a father, he was not focusing on children rejecting mothers, um, is being coached and poisoned by the mother to be alienated from the father. And of course, certain fathers' rights organizations who fight for mandatory 50-50 so that fathers can avoid child support. Um,
Mm.
those organizations have latched onto this. It has permeated its way through family court and court professionals' terminology. And so there's a fantastic study. If you're a geek and you want to geek out on it, all the data is in the Saunders study by Dr. Joan Meyer. And
Wow.
she researched and found out that there is a far higher risk of protective mothers losing custody to sexually and physically abusive fathers when they report the abuse, and then the fathers claim parental alienation to divert attention from their abuse onto the fact of that their children don't want and don't trust them, don't feel safe with them. It does not work in family court if mothers are claiming parental alienation to the
No.
same ratio as it does for fathers. It's a very misogynistic, patriarchal, in the worst ways, of
Yes.
weaponizing the reports of abuse against protective parents. Now, that being said, just because, due to its background and the way that it is used against safe moms, just because I do not use, and many others do not use the parental alienation, does not mean that children do not get alienated from the other parent, being poisoned by the abusive parent, that children don't get poisoned against the safe parent by abusive parents.
Hmm.
So, yes, there are plenty of times when an abusive ex will turn around and, to punish the mother who had the nerve to leave him and to escape his control, he will poison the children against her. So, yes, that happens. What do we call it? It's called domestic violence by proxy,
Yes.
where he continues perpetrating domestic violence and terrorizing the mother by poisoning the children. Now the children are his weapons against her, in addition to whatever else: money, property,
Hmm.
fake motions, litigation that makes no sense, that all that kind of thing. But so when you have a, back to your common challenges question, that's our rabbit hole of nerding out
It
on the
was great.
explanations of
I learned,
things.
I did not know that about the parental alienation, where it came from, and that he was,
Yes,
wow.
it's horrifying. If you just Google Richard Gardner parental alienation, pedophilia, or children and sex, you will find all kinds of stuff, quotes from his writings and all kinds of things. It's horrifying background. And the whole purpose was to reunite sex offenders with their minor children and get them away from protective moms. So it's really horrific, and that's why I really stand against using that term. Um,
Yes.
but at the same time, if your children are being poisoned against you, one of the most common challenges is, how do I maintain or regain a healthy, loving relationship with the children that I have sacrificed everything to keep safe, now that they are being wined and dined by Disney Dad and told that I am the whole problem?
Yes.
And I
That is
think
hard.
those that like reintegration from being scared from dad back into safe place, prepping children with safety tools for when they have to be away from you, and dealing with um, that that recognition that your child is not mature enough to see things through grown-up eyes. Your hands are tied. You can't tell them dad was raping me for the last 15 years and stalking me in the dark while you were asleep. You can't
Yeah.
tell your 11-year-old or your 14-year-old some of that information, and dad's just telling
Hmm.
them mom's denied God's word. She's apostate. She's torn apart our family. If you want to be mad at someone, be mad at mom. Mom's the one who threw me out. Mom's the reason I can't buy you everything. Mom's the reason I had to get an
Yeah.
apartment. Mom,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah. She's the unrepentant person.
Yeah.
I wanted my family together, all of that. And so the child begins to see you as the problem. It's definitely is heartbreaking for women.
Yeah. And you know what? I would say one other thing. Probably the other most common thing that I get is when moms are getting ready to leave and they're
Hmm.
worried, how do I talk about a pending separation or divorce that is upcoming to my children, knowing they're about to get really traumatized more than they already are. How
Hmm.
do I prep them for this? So where do you want to start? Because your next question,
Yes.
I mean, is about
I'm
practical
sitting
ways,
there like,
right?
okay, yes.
Give me a
Uh,
direction.
let's see the direction here. Let's go to the
Or do
next
we have
question now.
comments?
Yeah, we do have a comment. A question is, how do we protect our children from being emotionally abused?
Hmm. That's a very good one. I really like that, actually. And I just realized you're streaming this live on Facebook, right?
Yes, and YouTube.
So, Facebook and YouTube, well, I'm not going to get over on YouTube right now, but while we're looking at those questions, I'm going to go share this so that
Yes, and
we hold on. I'm listening to myself here. I'm going to turn off my thing and I'm going to just take a hot second to share this.
yes, I want to
Um,
see.
so yeah, can you repeat that
Yes, your question was,
question?
how do we protect our children when they're being emotionally abused?
Okay. Different ages call for different approaches
Mm-hmm.
first. Um, and I'm going to drop this, come on, onto my page. There we go. Oh, I see we have several comments. Oh, and Kathy Ann Moyer just dropped Dr. Joan Meyer's study in there. Thank you, Kathy.
Oh, she's amazing.
You're
She's our volunteer.
awesome. You're awesome.
She is.
Okay. Okay. I am now looking at my phone and I'm seeing the questions that are coming in. How do we protect our children when they're being emotionally abused? The whole, if you don't foster a relationship with the other parent, you don't get primary custody. And they're like not even in school yet. So they're little ones. Okay. So, first of all, the question that you need to ask yourself is, if my kid's father, since we're talking to mamas, I'm just going to stick with a gendered approach. So if my kid's dad were healthy and safe, would I want my children to have a thriving, vibrant relationship with him? Of
Yes.
course you would.
Every parent would.
Of
Yes.
course you would. So when it comes to family court and the approach of fostering a relationship with the other parent,
Mm-hmm.
your approach and mindset needs to be, I want to do everything in my power to help my children have a safe, healthy, thriving relationship with their dad.
Ooh, I love that.
This is, I think that when we're dealing with trauma and we're parenting through trauma, and we know our partner, our ex-partner, is an unsafe person, we lose sight of the fact that if he were safe, of course we would want our children to have this vibrant relationship with dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can come across to family court when we are not educated in this, and family court is not educated in what we're going through. It's easy for mamas to come across to family court as super locked down and you don't want your children to see dad. And then you just sound like a vengeful, bitter ex who you are the one who's trying to punish dad by not letting him see his kids. But if you change that narrative, I want more than anything for my children to have a safe, healthy, thriving relationship with their dad. How do we get that? Then the focus is, how do we make sure dad is safe, healthy, and the relationship is thriving? So in that situation, when dad shows up and there are no car seats in the car, they can't have a safe relationship with dad when there aren't any car seats. That prevents them from having safety with dad. So can we please address that? When dad is not feeding them on his time, when he has them for the afternoon, he drops them off at 9 o'clock. They're ravenous. They've had nothing but goldfish since they picked them up from daycare or whatever. And it's now 9:30 p.m. Or when you get them back from a week on dad's time or 5 days or whatever, and they haven't had a bath the entire time and they're caked in filth and their diapers areas are raw or whatever. So you're immediately, your trauma is jumping straight into mama bear. And understandably, God created us to be like, don't hurt my babies. Don't hurt my babies. But when you're dealing with family court, you need a couple of good friends that you can go do the thing. And then you need to write it down and present it as, hey, I want my children to have a safe, healthy, thriving relationship with dad. So when they don't get baths for 5 days and their diaper area is raw, that's really concerning because then they don't feel safe with dad. Can you see how that changes the way that you come across?
Yes. And I know from Tiffany Lesnick talking to the lawyer too, when you present it, when things are subpoenaed in a court via text, is approaching, hey, part of our agreement is you have to provide a safe place for our children. And when you don't have a car seat, this violates our agreement. Therefore, until this is in place, because I want you to keep our children safe, you can't have her. Then you tag the lawyers on it and everything's fine.
You can't transport her if you are actually violating state laws. Because those are safety laws. And then it's not, I don't want him to have my kid. It's, we want her to be safe. She has to be safe in order for this to happen. Safety, stability, healthy. And there's a lot of stuff that fits under the expectations of safe, stable, and healthy.
Yes. And it protects you as a mother too, because you're responsible if you send your child in a car with somebody without a car seat. So you are saying, presenting yourself as the responsible mother that's following the laws, and therefore dad needs to follow the laws as well.
Right. Now, and that cuts both ways. You can't be taking shortcuts with your children's safety and their stability on your end either, because you have to hold yourself to the standard that you expect for him to be held to. And the fact is, court is just way, way harder on moms. Moms have to be perfect rock stars, and dads can show up and suck air and be like, hey, I'm here for my kids. I'm not too high, you know? But changing the narrative in how moms present themselves. So when we are talking about, yeah, okay, what the children say is hearsay. And that's all I'm getting now is what dad says to me about them, and it hurts their feelings. Your children need to be in with a therapist so that they can be discussing this with a therapist, and then therapist can be confronting dad on how he is disparaging mom.
Yes.
Nothing that your children say to you really will ever be, as things are in the United States right now, nothing your children say to you will be admissible in court. It will be hearsay. So if your children are telling you things that are very concerning, you need to have your children in with a play therapist or a trauma therapist that is appropriate and skilled for their age. And that needs to be a constant, ongoing basis, even if that means you don't buy new shoes or you don't get other things. It's super important. One, because your kids need somebody outside of mom or dad to be able to talk to that they trust and that is safe, that is in their corner. Two, because you need tips and tools. You
Mm-hmm.
need support that is unique to your situation to be able to meet your kids' needs and help them have this healthy, thriving, safe relationship with yourself and hopefully with your partner, ex-partner. And you need, third, you need a qualified, credentialed voice that can speak to the experience of the children legally in a courtroom if needed about what the children are saying they experience. So,
Yes.
getting your children into a therapist, and then you stay out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go tell the therapist what to do and how to handle everything. Um, you have to just say this is a talking doctor. This is a play doctor. Sometimes we go get checkups for our hearts, we get checkups for our bones, we get checkups for our feelings. And
Mm-hmm.
I see more comments coming in here. Um, let's see. What if the abuser has managed to legally force them to stop trauma and play therapy? Ah, this happens. In
Yes,
that
it does.
case, encourage them to, if you are able, encourage them to speak freely and talk to anyone who will listen. Teachers, guidance counselors at school,
Mm-hmm.
music teachers, doctors, nurses. You tell them to talk about what they are going through to anyone who will listen. Somebody will end up being a mandatory reporter. And if they keep talking about it, somebody will pay attention. That's hard.
Yes, one of our child's therapists that we interviewed on Monday said that a guidance counselor is a really good way to go at school. Like, just because that's required at school, you can't do that, but just making sure that the guidance counselor is maybe aware of what's going on and that this person can be a safe adult that this child can talk to. And
Yes.
they are mandatory reporters if they're at school.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. So there are ways to kind of make mandatory reporters in your children's lives. You
Mm-hmm.
want as many um, you want as many effective professionals as possible to be actively involved in your children's lives. Now, I'm not saying you need to go get like, what is it, Munchausen syndrome or something and start taking your kid to every doctor possible. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying you want them to have a number of other caring, healthy adults that they are surrounded with so that when the time and the opportunity is available,
Mm-hmm.
that they are able to talk to people who are safe. But doesn't it have to be a trauma-informed therapist? I'm saying people helpers can cause more harm if they don't understand coercive control. Yes, it ideally it should be. But if that opportunity or that option has been taken away from you, work with what you have.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let your children have no one just because you have not been able to get them into a trauma therapist. Another thing would be to talk to their pediatrician, talk
Mm-hmm.
to their the guidance counselor, carefully express your concerns, and if any or either or both or all of those are willing to suggest a referral professionally that the child needs trauma therapy, you can take that back to the court and say, hey, this child is still struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Judge, can you please allow a therapist to be considered? The challenge is all of those things take time. None of those things are quick solutions. So, things that you can do in the meantime include teaching your children to recognize emotional mistreatment and teaching your children that they have the right and the permission to speak up and use their voice. So, for example, by the time a child is old enough to learn this is my belly button and this is my kneecap and these are my toes, you can start talking to them about tricky people. You can talk to them about when someone says something nice but does something nasty, that's a tricky person. You can, if they're watching, goodness, Finding Nemo.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Dory and Nemo's dad meet the sharks at the shipwreck?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So when Dory and Nemo's dad talk to the shark starts by inviting them over for dinner. And it takes them a couple of minutes to figure out that the shark was inviting them to be the dinner.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to teach this based on dad's doing this to you. Just pause your child's favorite cartoon and say, oh, was he being honest or was he being tricky? Oh, he's tricky, Mom. You know what? You're right. That's called manipulation.
Yeah.
When somebody says something nice and means something nasty, that's not a safe person. There are moments like that in The Lion King, in is it, what's the one with Merida?
I've seen that one. I don't watch as many cartoons anymore.
And then there's the, you know what, I don't either. I only do occasionally for research for stuff like this because I can't stand stuff. It's not my genre. I'm more of a Downton Abbey girl, but anyway.
Hey, some people really do find their relaxation through cartoons. That is awesome. I am not one of those people. I love documentaries.
Yeah, I'm with you. But hey, if your children are watching even some of the most low-key, family-friendly things, here's one. Kipper. Did you ever watch Kipper? Kipper the dog. Super, super low-key. And one time, Pig in Kipper the dog, he has a candy stand. And everyone who walks up, it has candy for a penny and candy for 5 pennies and whatever. Everyone who walks up to his candy stand, he asks if they would like a free tasting. And when they point to the candy, he takes one and pops it in his mouth and tells them how good it is. He doesn't give them a free tasting. They point to the candy they're interested in, and he takes it, pops it in his own mouth, and goes, that's so good. You would really like that one. That's a manipulative, tricky person. He offered them a free tasting. He thought they would he knew they would assume and agree based on their understanding of his offer.
Yes.
It's like a cartoon for 2-year-olds. So, my point is, take whatever is already in your children's lives. Take
Mhm.
whatever they are already watching. Take whatever media or interactions is already going on around them. Stuff that has nothing to do with their abusive parent. And start teaching them what gaslighting means, what manipulation means, what being tricky and deceptive means, and teach them the words to use. Because there will come a point when eventually they recognize it on the part of the family's abuser. And children are unfiltered, and they will need to have the terms because they will be experiencing the feelings just like you did before you knew what was going on. They'll be
Mhm.
experiencing the brain fog and the confusion and the mind games on their own terms as kids
Mhm.
on some level or another. You can give them the gift of the vocabulary as soon as they are learning to string sentences together. But just don't present it packaged at their abuser. Present it in observations in everyday life. And just a side note, gaslighting is not when you disagree, it is intentionally manipulated reality. Here
Mhm.
is a really good game. It's called the truth game.
Mhm.
So you can be, you ever count uh, like the alphabet game when you're on a road trip or driving to school and the kids are pointing out things that they see on the billboard or whatever along the, you just, anytime you're together. Hey, look, do you know the truth? The grass is purple. And the kids go, Mom, no, it's not. I know the truth. I see what I see. The grass is green. And you play the truth game. You make up the most outlandish, crazy things you can think of. And the kids get to laugh and practice telling you back the truth based on what they see, what they hear, what they feel, what they smell. And you're teaching them, without them even knowing it, to stand firm on what they know to be true. If I saw you hit my sister, if I saw dad use a belt buckle to leave a bruise, and then later he says, "Nah, that's from when you ran into the table." No, I know the truth. I saw what I saw.
Mhm.
But you don't have to package it like that. You're just giving them the skills to see through things. Now, here's the risk. Children who have been given this kind of vocabulary and definitions of things prior to being mature, they are guaranteed to misapply it sometimes. And
Mhm.
probably they'll misapply it on you. So
Yes.
you will say, "It's noon." And they'll look at the clock and be like, "It's 11:57, Mom. It's not noon yet." And you're
That's
like,
my
"Well, it's around
life.
noon." Don't gaslight me. You're intentionally manipulating my reality because you just rounded to noon or something like that. I mean, especially now I'm speaking, I have two autistic kids that are super literal and they get really rigid on little technicalities and details. So maybe not every kid's like that.
We're
But
there. I gotta say the exact time, all the time.
so I mean, but whatever it is, then you can either, when your kids do that. Now, if you were raised in the kind of home where you were never allowed to tell your parents anything different than what they said, it's going to be
Mhm.
really hard for you to let your child speak back to you with a contradiction or a disagreement. But the thing is, you aren't training them to believe everything they're told. You're training them to think for themselves. Because if you're teaching them to believe everything you tell them without questioning and without ever contradicting or ever using their mind, you are also training them to accept their abusive parents' narrative without questioning. And if you're training them to question their abusive parents' narrative, even if you're not saying that. But if you're training them to think for themselves, they are also going to question your narrative. And if you were raised where children don't talk back and don't ask questions, you're going to have to let that go. You can
Mm-hmm.
either have children who never talk back, or you can have children who think for themselves well enough to have a shot at being safe. You cannot have both.
I love that. That's really good.
So if you're going to do this and you're going to give them permission to speak truth and to observe emotional abuse and to have those tools, you have to be prepared for the fact that when you slip up, they are going to call you out on it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's your job to respond safely, to not blow up and shut them down. And that's
Yeah.
hard, especially if you weren't raised where children are both seen and heard. So
Mm-hmm.
it requires a total change in how you discuss things with your kids and what you expect of them. You cannot expect them to think for themselves and blindly obey you, but not the other parent.
Yes, very true. And sometimes you have to look within yourself and realize what is this revealing about you when you're getting upset. Like being willing to deal with those things. And maybe
Yep.
you need to deal with things from your own childhood where you weren't allowed to speak back and validate that inner person that never felt she had a voice.
Yep. So letting your kids have a voice means they're going to use that voice against you sometimes. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to sting. You're going to have to figure out how to respond well and in healthy ways. And the good thing is, if you're open about it with them and you can say, look, when I was a kid, I never was free or safe to speak the way I'm letting you do it. And sometimes I don't know how to reply. And sometimes it makes me mad before I even realize that I'm getting mad. And I really don't need to be mad. And I'm having to learn this too.
Mm-hmm.
By the time your kids are in elementary school, middle school, if you own that, you can come together through this journey in really beautiful ways. And you have to
Yes.
remember, you are not parenting for the purpose of getting your child right now to see through all of the fog,
Mm-hmm.
because that's impossible. They don't have the maturity, and you're not allowed to give them all the facts. And especially if they are still interacting with the other parent at all, it's just,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be able to be the only one speaking into their narrative. What you are parenting for is your kid at the age of 25. All your parenting is for your 25-year-old who comes back home and says, Mom, I'd like to see the records. I'd like to see the documentation. Now that I have some life experience under my belt, I can see the manipulation. I'm sorry for when I didn't see it as a kid. Now I can understand you lived through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Now I recognize that at each point you did the most truthful, safety-oriented thing for all of us that you could do at any given time. And I'm sorry for when I didn't understand. That's what
Wow.
you're parenting for. So that every step of the way, when your 25-year-old is ready to have a conversation, you can truthfully and honestly and humbly stand by every decision you've made along the way.
Wow.
And that kind of changes the way we look at things so that we're less reactive in the moment about trying to get it right now. What parenting decision can I defend with my head held high to my 25-year-old 10, 15 years from now?
Yes.
How long are we supposed to be on here? Because
I am just
it's
letting
gone
this soak in, and I'm like,
fast.
that's very profound. I'm just like, wow, that was really good.
Let's look at the comments here.
Everybody loves what you're saying there about parenting to the for our children when they're 25.
Ah, cool. Well, when I began learning that, I actually, it was Psalm 82 Initiative that really
Mhm.
hammered that home for me. And I've clung to that over the years.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to share that forward. Um, I'm
It's
just kind
very
of
good. And
looking through
one
here.
comment saying, will this live discussion be replayed? All of our recordings are kept live on YouTube and on Facebook as well. So you can rewatch it anytime.
Parenting for the 25-year-old. Hi, Renata. I'm glad you stumbled on it today.
Yes.
Um, yes, it will be replayed. So, what next? Like, I kind of like ran up to the end of my string on that, and now I don't have another string fed into my brain. So
Well, we have a couple more
redirect.
questions left. I enjoyed this whole this was really good. I was in there, wow, mesmerized in the whole truth. That's really profound and very encouraging. And I think we all need to be reminded of that if you're parenting traumatized children, that, sometimes it gets hard and you can lose sight. And so many
Hmm.
people, especially, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just got an idea.
Oh, okay. I was saying, especially within the church, a lot of times women that have overcome, they tend to be judged, and they're like, someday your child's going to hate you for what you put them through, or they tend to look down on you, or be like, look at your child doing this or that, and judge you instead of understanding the whole situation and that God is working in their hearts. And like you doing your part, eventually someday they're going to be able to look back and see that you truly tried to do the best you absolutely could for them. And it's like trusting God with that, and not
Yes.
getting discouraged in the process, because not everybody's going to be reminding you of this truth. And it's just the church sometimes, though we're very supportive, the church is not always set up for single mothers to be in the most supportive way. And so sometimes the messages that you get can be very mixed, and it's easy to believe that my child's going to be ruined or this is going to happen, but just trusting the process is very important.
Yes, I agree with all of it. Absolutely. And to piggyback on that, a couple of things. Never lie to your kids. When they come
Hmm.
back at 25, you will not be able to defend having lied or covered things up. And that can be hard when you feel like your hands are tied and you're not allowed to tell them anything. So, what you
Hmm.
can say is, I'm not able to discuss that with you. I'm not free to have that conversation. When you're 18, when you're an adult, I will answer any question you have. One, and we may have talked about this last time we did. Tell me if we did, but anyway, it fits now. I'll share it again. So,
Yes.
one of the best ways to do this, and I actually, in our little merchandise shop with Wild, I've created what we call a someday journal. And I have one for girls and I have one designed for boys. And one of the best ways to go about this, because is to write their questions down. Because children have a very hard time putting the lid on a box and putting it on a shelf when
Hmm.
something feels like it's hanging unanswered. It's going to still bother them. They can't
Hmm.
put it away and relax. So they keep saying, well, why did daddy move out? Or, well, what did daddy do to you that was so bad? And
Hmm.
you keep saying, I can't talk about it. Or someday when you're older, or you're too little to understand. Well, all of those things feel super invalidating to a child who has sensed things and they didn't ask for their world to just get flipped upside down and shaken like a snow globe. So, what you can do is help them feel that they have an opportunity to come back to it. A really good way to do that is you can either use an app, like an encrypted journal app, or get a specific notebook, like our Someday Journal. And that's what you can call it that. I'm going to put that in our Someday notebook. And someday, when you are old enough and the situation is right, I will be able to answer that question. So tell me what your question is. I'm going to write down today's date and I'm going to write down your question. And it's safe in the Someday Journal. And when you're ready to have the answer and you're an adult, you can come back to me. And anything that you don't already have figured out, you can ask me. We'll go over these questions together in the Someday Journal. That way, you're
That.
telling them you will give them the truth. You cannot give them the truth right
Mm-hmm.
now, but you will give it to them when you are free to do so and they are old enough to carry it.
Yes.
And you can tell them, I recognize that it's hard not to have these answers. There are
Mm-hmm.
some things I am just not allowed to talk about. And there are some things you just simply aren't strong enough to carry the truth about. So I can't
Yes.
answer those things for you. I'm not going to make up answers to make you feel better, but I will write down your questions. And someday we will go over the answers. And they will be there safe, waiting for you. But never lie. Don't say, I promise you'll be safe, when your child knows in their heart they're not safe.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say, I promise daddy won't hurt you, when you know they've experienced harm and that is their lived experience, because that just makes you out to be a liar. Don't say comforting lies. Don't say covering up lies. You cannot defend comforting or cover up that is falsehood when they are 25 and they come back to you. You can't stand
Yes.
by that. What you can stand by is, I know you're scared. I know you're worried, or I know you're anxious. I promise I will be right here waiting at 5 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. You can't promise that daddy will bring them back because you are not in charge of daddy's actions, but you can promise that you will be there waiting at 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon. You can promise that you will always listen to them to the best of your ability when they have things to talk about. You can promise that when they get home, you are going to wrap them up in big hugs and go have ice cream. You can
Mm-hmm.
promise things that are truthful, that you are in control of. But do not try to comfort or cover things up with pretty falsehoods, because you can't stand by those when they're adults. And it just
No.
makes you out to be another person manipulating their reality. And you don't want to be a person manipulating their reality.
Very true.
When they're younger than teenagers, integrating kids back in after they've had a very dysregulating parenting time with the other parent can be super
Mm-hmm.
hard. It's something
Mm-hmm.
that moms struggle with nonstop. And if this is your experience and you're watching this and you're like, oh my goodness, every time I get my kids back from their dad, they are completely thrown off. It takes me 3 days to get them back on schedule. And then he has them for dinner the next day. So we have like 24 good hours. And then it takes them another 2 days after dinner on Wednesday night or whatever to get them back on schedule. And then we have like 4 good days until the next week's dinner. And then we have 24 hours or 48. And then he has them for the weekend. And then it takes me 3 days to get them back on schedule. So you're like on this boomerang, just loop.
Yes.
That's normal. It is not
Mm-hmm.
your kid's fault. It is not your fault. You are not doing something wrong. Your child is getting dysregulated, and it's really common. So here's a few tips, practical tips. When your kids are older, it'll look a little different, but as long as they are young enough and small enough to still be okay with hugs and to still be okay with coming and sitting up closer next to you, these are things that you can do. First of all, if it's possible, when you pick them up, stop by a park or someplace outside to run, play, swing, slide, because that is regulating. Time outside with big exercise movement, if it's possible. Now I realize maybe you live in a really big city, it's not possible. Maybe it's the dead of winter and you're in Siberia and it's totally unreasonable. But if it's possible, find a way to do big movement as soon as possible. Then when you get home or on your way home, have a tradition. Maybe you don't do sweets all week long, but when you pick up from dad, you stop and get a teeny tiny ice cream cone. Or you stop at the grocery store and you go into the bakery and everybody gets a free sugar cookie at the bakery. Like, it doesn't have to be an expensive thing. It's just something that's your tradition. And once you start it, all hell will break loose if you try to skip this tradition, because it's part of their reintegration and they will depend on it. So once you start it, make sure it's something that is sustainable. When you get home, you want food, you want water, and you want snuggles. Make sure they're fed so they are not dealing with low blood sugar. Hot baths or hot showers immediately, because warm water is soothing and regulating, especially in combination with big movement outdoors in the fresh air. And then snuggle time. Maybe your kids never sleep in your bed, but on the night they come home from dad's, they all get to fall asleep in mommy's bed.
Mm-hmm.
Or the night they come home from dad's, everyone rolls up in blankets on the living room floor and you fall asleep with them there. And then either they sleep there for the night or you move them to their beds if they're little enough to do that. But it's their tradition. They need warmth, they need closeness, they need touch. And another really great way, especially if you have sensory kids, and a lot of trauma kids are very highly sensory.
Mm-hmm.
My kids call them pressure hugs. I have another friend who started doing this with her kids, and her kids called them squeezels. Some kids call them huggles. Whatever it is, you take them, and if they're little, they sit on your lap with their back to your chest, so they're facing out. They pull their knees up, and you wrap their arms either inside their knees or around their knees, and then you put your arms all the way around them in front of their knees, and you squeeze really tight, rocking back and forth. It pulls the muscles around the gluteals. It's a spinal reset. It's a complete neural brain reset. It's a very somatic exercise. And it's a regulating nerve reset. So pull them in like they're in a little fetal position, wrap them up, rock them back and forth. And if they're too big for that, do the same thing and then roll them up in a blanket burrito. So for bigger kids, it can be a squeezle burrito. And then if they're really big kids, but they still like that sense of pressure, it's kind of like crush my soul back into my body kind of thing, put couch cushions on top of them. I have a big, like almost 5'10" middle schooler who still loves these, but he's way too big to sit in my lap. So he will lay under a beanbag and say, "Mommy, come sit on the beanbag." Well, it would be really weird for me to just sit on my middle school aged kid, but on top of the beanbag, the pressure is evenly distributed. And he just lays there like, and after 2 or 3 minutes, it's just all better. And that can work after a really hard day at school. It doesn't have to be reintegrating from dad's house. But if you have those kind of things where you consistently have this tradition and you work in those body things, it reminds your children they are safe. They are back home. Here, things are peaceful. Here, things are safe. Here, things are predictable.
Mm-hmm.
And you can help them reintegrate quicker, so it doesn't take 3 or 4 days when you start implementing these kind of things. Now, I just got a notification that my computer is going to go to sleep soon, and I did not have it plugged in because it was fully charged when we started. But one of the things I did want to say, and on my little screen here, we have the Trauma Momas app. This is the kind of stuff that we have as trauma tools. It's one of a number of things that we have in our mobile app. So we created a mobile app for Trauma Mamas. And
Love
there's a
it.
ton of free content. There's free crash courses on abuse. There's free charts. There's free global hotlines and helplines for domestic violence crisis situations in over 200 regions around the world. There's just tons and tons of free stuff. And then we also have an upgrade membership that's a sisterhood community. And in that, we do monthly toolkits for safety, how to clean your phone, how to handle legal stuff. And we bring in experts in those areas. So
Love it.
all these different things. So we have like an expert tip every month's toolkit. And then we also have a trauma tool to help you regulate your anxiety and your sense of safety as a mother. And we have one for the children so that you can, and they're read by kids. So like it's an audio, and then it has all of the little activities that you can do with your kids and there's a new one every single month. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. If this is something where you're saying, oh my goodness, I need this so badly, we have a monthly version of this where you get new material and then weekly resource links and all of that stuff, specifically from an instinctual trauma recovery certified specialist that has created them for children and mamas with exactly these situations in mind. So,
Wow, that's amazing.
yeah.
I love it. I need to get that. I'm in Trauma Mama's Facebook, but I don't have the app. So now I'm like, I need to get this.
Oh, well, you got to get the app, Lauren.
I know. I'm just like, oh, I need to. I love the Trauma Mamas group. I actually utilize it a lot myself.
That's
encouraging.
awesome. And that's another thing we have. I know Call to Peace has support groups too, and we do too. We have the Trauma Mama support group, so it's a great place to connect.
Yes, it's different. It's on Facebook, and it's just a place to connect with other moms and talk about trauma and parenting.
Yeah, it's just a free one of the free things we do. We have a lot of free things we do.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for all of your time here today. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Don't want to lose you with your computer.
I know. Yeah, I don't want my computer to die, and then it's just like, there she blows.
Where did she go?
I think that was a lot of information. So if it felt like drinking from a fire hose, watch it 5 times. I mean,
it was amazing. I learned so much. It was just encouraging and uplifting. So it's just good to be reminded of this, no matter how long you've been in the journey, just of pressing on. And yeah, just a reminder too out there, if you're a people helper watching this, I think sometimes that is one of the most things. Like there's several people helpers that really do want to serve and understand domestic abuse, but there's so many people that try to jump in. Oh, it's a train.
My train. It's my
yeah,
train.
I've heard your train before.
Every time.
Love it. I love trains.
Sorry, people helpers. Totally derailed you there.
No, that's great. Thank you for reminding me what it was about. I was just saying, I think it's so important that when you jump in to a single mom's world is try not to judge the situation, try not to judge the behaviors. Don't just stand by and be willing to support. If you're watching this and you're like, I would love to be able to support single mothers or in my church or wherever it is, but just be willing to be a friend that listens and without judgment, and don't pretend that and relate your kids and how you parent in a 2-parent household that's never been through divorce compared to how her family looks, because it's very different. And as another reminder, don't compare your trauma to other traumas as well. I think that's something that's so triggering, and it's so painful when you finally explode and just say, this is what's going on in my life, and you're bearing your heart and soul, and somebody says, well, I wish my situation was that. Let me tell you about mine. And it makes you feel gaslighted in and of yourself that you should feel bad for feeling bad about your situation. And it's just like each of us have pain through what we've been through if we're parenting outside of domestic abuse. And it's being willing to hold space for where that person's at without judgment. And so I just wanted to wrap it up with both of those things. And it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I know Sarah McDugal is doing things too, which I'm following, and that I love it and cheering you on as we're trying to educate people about the realities of domestic abuse and the impacts of it on our on our individual lives, on our children, on our churches, and our communities. It's 1 out of 3 women, and it impacts all of us. And at Call to Peace Ministries, we do offer free advocacy support groups to women coming out of domestic abuse. And we also offer church training, and all of that is free because we have donors that partner with us. And so we are still collecting donations and trying to reach our goal. We're about $75,000 from our goal. So definitely do donate if you feel compelled to support women. Every little bit helps, even if that's giving up your coffee for the month and you're doing 20. That will give somebody a 1 hour phone call with calling them to Call to Peace for the first time to process. So every little bit does something. It meets some woman's need. So please join us and be part of it. And thank you so much to Sarah for joining us today and for everything you shared. I love following you on Facebook. I learned so much from you. And so it was just a joy to have you here today and learn from you again.
Thank you, Lauren, and all the best to everything that you guys are doing. You're filling such a need. Thank you for this today.
Thank you too for your voice. And so thank you for everybody joining us. You can rewatch it. I would recommend watching it a couple times to soak it all in. So y'all have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.